the professor comes in, you know, the first lecture in psych, and he walks in, he's got a big bushy beard, and he looks at the rate there, and he looks at us, and he says, apologies, gentlemen. Ladies, I'd like you to all know that men think with their Johnsons. And then he started the lecture, which had nothing to do with that, and I'm sitting there going, well, they talk about trance induction, so men think with their Johnsons, right? And
It's true, yeah.
Was that supposed to be reassuring?
I don't know. So they maybe just to warn them or stay away. I don't know. But
Sit at the front?
it obviously had a big impact on me because I still remember it to this day.
You mean he never picked it up later? He never...
No, it had nothing to do with the lecture. No, it's just he walked in, saw us, and I was so scared. Yeah, we'd all gravitated together. I take that as an interesting neuro-linguistic representation. NLP says that very little of human communication, very little language is metaphorical, that all metaphors are literal descriptors of unconscious experience. That when we use a word, it's a literal descriptor of what's going on inside your mind-body patterning system. So this has been validated over the last decade or so by a huge amount of research in the field of cognitive linguistics, Lakoff and Johnson, metaphors we live by, etc., and by a field called embodied cognition. So incredible stuff. And in fact, I've just come across some amazing papers in the last couple of weeks in preparation to find some scientific backings for some behavioural modelling work I've been doing for an MBIT professional development day that I'm doing in New Zealand. Well, I'll probably be doing it online, and I'll make it available to any of the MBIT coaches as a webinar. So when one of the most powerful things you can do, and one of the ways I developed discovered mBraining, is just start tracking people's neurolinguistics. So I use the internet as a huge linguistic corpus, and I would do keyword searches, and Google have incredible tools to allow you to do keyword pairings and look for this word, what other words are the most used words in frequency distribution of other words with this word. So I can look up heart and see what was paired with heart. So this is how just one of the many ways that I was able to determine what are some of the core competencies, or to verify what are some of the core competencies of each of the neural networks. So it tunes you, though, calibration, to listen to the language that people are using. And this is an important part of what's called clean language, where you use other people's expressions the way they use them, and you don't project onto them. You'll be hearing more about this in the next. And once I stop talking, you get back onto learning MBIT in a formal way, and that is that we project our own models of the world. So we hear somebody say a word, and we intuit what we think it means, but we do it through our personal history, going back through our family history and all the rest of what a word means. So when you start listening, and I heard that that was the most graphic example. Men think with their Johnson, and men think with their dicks. And I heard that many times. Think with their dicks. We've got this expression in English that they think with their dicks. I've also got a book on my bookshelf that, interesting enough, a girlfriend gave me one time, called The Wise Womb. We talk about the womb as having wisdom. There are ways of expressing this. And I was thinking, so if there's neurolinguistics about this, there's likely to be something that underlies the reason why we have ways of expressing this. And Byron Robinson, MD, back in 1895, wrote a book that was, so this is the enteric nervous system. He discovered the enteric nervous system. So he was a medical anatomist, and in fact there was a big sort of socio-political fight that went on in Western medicine, and he'd written a lot of anatomy textbooks, but he wasn't the one who won the day. So his little group got minimalised, and Gray's anatomy became the core anatomy textbook that was taught. And so unfortunately, there's a huge amount of work that Byron had done on the enteric nervous system. And the book he wrote was The Enteric and Reproductive Brains. So he said that he discovered evidence of a complex nervous system that looked like a brain in the enteric, and a separate one in the reproductive system. Now, in the last 15 years, So they got lost in the annals of medical science. You know, the textbooks are there. I've got a copy of it, but nobody, you know, it's sitting in a bookshelf in libraries around the world, never got taught, and it's only in the fullness of time that with Professor Gershon and the work of neurogastroenterology that this new field has gotten going with it. Now it's in Gershon's book, The Second Brain, where he said, look, there's an enteric nervous system, which the enteric nervous system was considered to be just a part of the autonomic nervous system, just an extension of it. So no, it's a separate, adaptive, complex, functional neural network. It learns, it has memory, it processes separately. It's connected via the autonomic nervous system to the central nervous system, but it's a brain in its own right. So then you start Googling this, and because so many books, old books, have been digitised and put on the web, suddenly you find, you know, Byron Robinson's book. So Byron is still saying there's a sex brain, a reproductive brain. I'm saying there's neurolinguistics to this, and there's lots of esoteric and spiritual tradition evidence to say that there's some form of intelligence. There's a chakra, there's two, you know. So there's something going on down here from information and intelligence perspective. And it makes sense, because if you look at, now you go, so you know, if we recapitulate that mind map of how I came to develop, you know, mBit, all that work I did, we just follow that round. So we're going around and go, all right, so let's look at the history of evolution. So if you look at the gut brain and how the enteric nervous system evolved and developed and what it developed for, you know, you've got Cecil the sea slug, and you've got this tube of lots of cells that have now, you know, agglomerated together to form a tube, and it needs to be able to do a couple of things. It needs to monitor the environment for safety, self-preservation. As part of self-preservation, it has to detect food, move towards it, danger, move away from it, and of course it has to reproduce. So it has to go looking for sexy Cecillettes and go and, you know, do a little bit of kissing to start the whole thing off, right? Which is interesting too, because you notice when we go into romance with the links to sexuality, right, and the sex brain, when we go into romance, almost all cultures want to share bodily fluids. So we kiss or we rub noses, we do this thing where we make sure that the distal end of our gut brain gets to smell and taste the other person. And isn't it interesting that if you talk about, like with a marriage can be annulled legally if it hasn't been consummated. So you've got to consume, which is go with the neurolinguistics. Consume is to eat, right? To make. We consummate. It's all in the neurolinguistics. Just take every word and unpack it and go back, you know, to etymology and figure out what's going on in the mind-body system. There's a reason we have these phonemes connected together to make this sort of meaning. You know?
When you said kissing, why did you look at me?
I didn't want to tell you, but I've had this dream about you. What's some dreams up there? Dream language. Yes, so the reproductive brain, I believe there is a reproductive brain. There is some evidence people are starting to talk about it. There's, for example, so medicine is so far behind a lot of things. So,
Well put.
the clitoris, you know, we're all adults. I'm sure we can talk about this.
I didn't hear that.
Yeah. I hope we're all adults here. If anyone's under 16, please leave the room. And that may not be in age, but in emotionality. So the anatomy of the clitoris has only been discovered properly in the last less than 10 years. It was a woman, anatomist. She discovered that what they've been teaching medical students for the last 100 years is wrong. Yeah. What a surprise. So, you know, notice we didn't get the penis wrong, but the clitoris missed bits that are definitely in there and are important functional aspects of it. It's not taught. Wasn't
And they
even.
need to be left there, Grant?
No, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's
No parts removed.
Yeah,
doesn't
exactly.
really enhance anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So if it's taken the last, you know, decade to discover what really is the anatomy of it, how could you miss it? You know, you've got cadavers and you're doing dissections, and if you're a reproductive specialist, how could you miss that? All right, it's not as obvious as the penis because it's sticking out, but it's the majority of the clitoris is inside the body. But we don't miss other bits that are inside the body. We don't go, we didn't know you had a liver. So, we just discovered a whole lobe to the liver. Never knew it was there before, but now we just say, what hope have we got that medicine is going to validate that we've got a reproductive brain? And I do think that if you look from an evolutionary perspective and you look at what those neural networks needed to do from a behavioural perspective, and therefore what the prime functions of this neural network will be, you can see that it gets somewhat subsumed or lumped into the enteric nervous system, the gut brain, because of the fact we do consummate. We do describe sexuality often as a hunger. So we have two aspects of sexuality. One is a very hunger thing, and I'm going to eat her up, and oh God, she's delicious, and even though, what a hunk. Hunk of what? Ham? What's a hunk?
They talk about sex drive.
Yeah, motility.
It's something that's unconscious, because that's part of what we had chuckles about and wanted to, I think, explore with you. Does EMBIT have a role to play in helping young men especially, and young women, find that balance so it doesn't feel that they're being consumed by their hormones by a biological drive? Is that the next level of consciousness?
It has to be, because of what's happening with what's going on in the internet and pornography and both males and females, young girls.
Off the charts.
Yeah, and there's research being done right now that shows that it's affecting what's happening in their neurological circuitry, and that they therefore can't express themselves as sexual beings, which is at the core sense of genderised of sexual self, appropriately, because they're expecting that what they see on the internet, which is completely extremely non-normal, is now what they expect. So it's many aspects. It's dissociating them incredibly. So dissociative disorder, and so disconnecting the heart.
Huge role to play then.
Huge, absolutely huge, absolutely huge. Yeah. So I've actually been speaking to some MBIT coaches who work in the field of sexual dysfunction. There's some who work with women who've been raped or molested, etc., and what happens there, and some who work with men and sexual dysfunction. Men, because it puts a lot of pressure on men to try and perform when they're expecting a relationship that's nothing, that in reality is nothing like what they see on the internet, and then they can't perform, and that links into self-identity, and then they get depression, and there's all sorts of, and then they turn to various forms of drugs, but that makes them feel worse, and has all sorts of impacts on the rest of their life, and so eventually they come along to see a therapist or a coach. So there are some people who are starting to use MBIT, and I believe that, especially when you look at the impacts of the autonomic nervous system on sexuality, there's a really fine dance in doing the sexual act of having both sympathetic and parasympathetic. You literally need to have that beautiful balance, because in order to get an erection, whether that's a penis or a clitoris, you need to have a certain level of parasympathetic and sympathetic. You've got to be relaxed enough, can't be too sympathetic,
and yet
stressed.
motivated enough.
That's right. And the orgasm requires a different aspect to the erectile performance. So you've got to get your oxytocin going. You've got to get all of that nipple sucking and touching and stroking that releases oxytocin.
We could go down this
for another hour. Yeah, so just to say, yes, I believe there is, but when you say the fourth brain, I'm not sure whether to say it's the sex brain, or whether to say it's the autonomic nervous system's brain.
Because when you say reproductive brain, Grant, that seems to limit it
just
to
to
the very
reproduction.
thing that it's the biological drive.
But I think it's more than that.
I think we're moving beyond that, hopefully,
Yeah, definitely.
in this new time.
Yeah, exactly. Well, 7 billion, 11 billion humans on the planet. I hope we're moving beyond just popping babies out. But